Jimi nodded, sat down in the chair, and with a single note, quietly dismantled every ego in the room. The rehearsal space was small. Wooden floor. Bare walls. One amplifier in the corner, barely humming. A chair. Nothing else. No stage. No lights. No crowd to distract from what was about to happen. 5 musicians sat on that floor. Local band. Good players. Respected in the London circuit. They'd heard the stories about Jimi Hendrix. The pyrotechnics, the teeth-playing, the guitar-burning spectacles that made headlines across Europe. They'd also heard he was playing a private session nearby. So they came. Not to learn. To challenge. The leader's name was David. 26 years old. Classically trained guitarist. Precise. Technical. The kind of player who could execute Paganini on 6 strings without breaking a sweat. He'd built his reputation on complexity, on speed, on proving that rock and roll could be as sophisticated as any concert hall performance. Jimi Hendrix represented everything David disdained. Showmanship over substance. Spectacle over skill. Gimmicks designed to hide mediocre playing behind fire and noise. At least, that's what David told himself. When Jimi walked into that rehearsal room, late afternoon, September 1967, a basement space in Camden that smelled like old wood and cigarette smoke. He wasn't wearing anything remarkable. Simple shirt. Jeans. His Stratocaster slung casually over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. He nodded to the 5 musicians sitting on the floor. Said nothing. Just nodded. David stood up. Mr. Hendrix. We wanted to meet you. Yeah? Jimi's voice was quiet. Not unfriendly. Just present. We've seen your shows. Impressive. Very theatrical. Jimi waited. But we were wondering. David glanced at his bandmates for support. They all nodded. We were wondering what you could do without all the tricks. No crowd. No fire. No performance. Just you and the guitar. The room went very still. Jimi looked at David for a long moment. Not angry. Not offended. Just looking. Like he was seeing something David couldn't see yet. You want me to play? Jimi asked. If you don't mind. Jimi looked around the small room. At the 5 musicians watching him. At the single wooden chair against the wall. At the amplifier that barely had enough power to fill this tiny space, let alone a concert hall. He walked to the chair. Sat down. Rested his Stratocaster across his lap. The rival band challenged Jimi. No crowd tricks, no effects, just you and guitar. Jimi nodded, sat down in a chair, and with a single note quietly destroyed every ego in that room. To understand what happened in the next 4 minutes, you need to understand what those 5 musicians expected. They expected technique. Maybe some blues licks. Perhaps a demonstration of speed or precision. They expected Jimi to try to prove himself using the same vocabulary they understood: scales, arpeggios, complex chord progressions. They were professional musicians. They knew music theory. They could recognize skill when they heard it. What they weren't prepared for was irrelevance. Jimi's eyes closed. His left hand moved to the fretboard. His right hand hovered over the strings. He played a single note. Not fast. Not complex. Just one note. Bent slowly. Held. Released. The sound filled the small room like water filling a glass. Every corner. Every silence. That one note somehow contained more information than it should have been possible for one note to contain. David felt something shift in his chest. A strange feeling. Not quite discomfort. Not quite awe. Something in between. Jimi played a second note. Different pitch. Same unhurried intentionality. He wasn't performing. He was speaking. The guitar wasn't an instrument. It was a voice. And it was saying something that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. The third note bent upward. Slow. Patient. like watching a sunrise in real time. David realized he was holding his breath. Jimmy's hands moved across the fretboard with an economy of motion that seemed impossible. No wasted movement. No flash. Just necessity. Every note existed because it needed to exist. Nothing more. Nothing less. 4 minutes. That's how long Jimmy played. He never opened his eyes. Never acknowledged the 5 musicians watching him. Never played anything that could be called a song, in any conventional sense. Just a series of notes and silences that somehow told a complete story. When the last note faded, allowed to decay naturally, Jimmy's hand still on the string, feeling it stop vibrating beneath his fingers, he opened his eyes slowly. The room was completely silent. David was still sitting on the floor. So were his bandmates. None of them had moved. They couldn't have told you when exactly they'd stopped being observers and become something else. Witnesses, maybe? Or students? Or people who just realized they'd been playing guitar for years without understanding what a guitar could actually say. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Jimmy stood up slowly. Adjusted the strap on his Stratocaster. Looked at David. "That what you wanted to hear?" His voice was gentle. No edge. No triumph. David opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. I don't understand what you just did." "Played guitar," Jimmy said simply. "No. I mean, that wasn't..." David struggled. "You didn't play anything. No song. No structure. Just notes." "Yeah. But how did you..." David looked at his own guitar lying beside him on the floor. Suddenly it looked like a foreign object. "How did you make it sound like that?" Jimmy tilted his head slightly. "Like what?" "Like it was talking. Like it was..." David's voice cracked slightly. "Like it knew something I don't know." Jimmy's expression softened. "It doesn't know anything, man. It's just wood and wire. You're the one doing the talking. Question is, what are you trying to say?" The words hung in the small room. One of David's bandmates, a bass player named Colin, spoke up quietly. "We came here to challenge you. To see if you were real or just show." "And?" Jimmy asked. "I don't think we have the right to challenge you," Colin said. "I don't think we're playing the same instrument." Jimmy smiled slightly. "Same instrument. Different conversation." He walked toward the door. Paused. Turned back. "David," he said. David looked up. "You play real clean. Real precise. I heard you before you came in here. You're good." David felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you. But you're playing like you got something to prove. Like the guitar's gonna tell you you're good enough if you play it right." David said nothing. "Guitar doesn't care if you're good enough," Jimmy continued. "Guitar just wants to know what you got to say. And if you spend all your time proving you can say it correctly, you never get around to saying anything." He adjusted his Stratocaster one more time. "You asked me what I can do without the tricks. That's what I can do. I can say something. The fire and the teeth and all that. That's just decoration. But it don't mean nothing if there's nothing being said underneath. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding." Jimmy left. The door closed softly behind him. The 5 musicians sat in that rehearsal room for another 20 minutes without speaking. The amplifier hummed quietly in the corner. Someone's watch ticked. Outside, traffic passed on the Camden Street. Finally, Colin broke the silence. "I need to go home and rethink everything." "Yeah," another bandmate said. David picked up his guitar. Held it. Looked at it like he was seeing it for the first time. "I've been playing for 15 years, he said quietly. "I thought I knew what I was doing." "We all did," Colin replied. David's hands moved to the fretboard. He played a single note. Tried to bend it the way Jimmy had bent his notes. The technique was there. The pitch was right. But it didn't sound the same. It sounded like someone doing an impression of saying something rather than actually saying it. He stopped. Put the guitar down. He wasn't showing off, David said. That's what I don't understand. He sat down in a chair in a room with 5 people who came to challenge him, and he didn't show off. He just talked. And somehow that was more devastating than anything else he could have done. In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. What Jimi Hendrix did in that small rehearsal room wasn't about technique. It wasn't about speed or complexity or proving he could outplay anyone in the room. He could have done that. Everyone there knew he could have done that. Instead, he did something far more dangerous to a musician's ego. He demonstrated that the entire framework they were using to understand music was incomplete. David and his bandmates had spent years mastering their instruments. They could play difficult passages. They understood theory. They knew modes and scales and harmonic progressions. But Jimi had shown them that all of that was just vocabulary. And having an extensive vocabulary means nothing if you don't have anything to say. It's the difference between someone who can recite a dictionary and someone who can write poetry. Both involve words. Only one involves meaning. The story of that afternoon spread quietly through London's music scene. Not as a dramatic tale of confrontation, but as something more subtle. Musicians who heard it didn't talk about it at parties. They thought about it alone, late at night, holding their instruments, and wondering what they'd been trying to say all these years. David's band broke up 6 months later. Not because of conflict, but because each member realized they needed to start over. To stop playing what they thought they were supposed to play and figure out what they actually wanted to say. David himself spent a year not performing at all. Just sitting in rooms. Playing single notes. Learning to listen to the space between sounds. Trying to understand the difference between correct and true. Years later, in a small interview for a music magazine that almost no one read, David was asked about meeting Jimi Hendrix. He didn't humiliate us, David said. That's what people don't understand. He could have. We came in there with challenge in our eyes, and he could have destroyed us. Played something so technically complex we'd never recover. Made us look like children. But he didn't? No. He sat down in a chair and played 4 minutes of the most gentle, patient music I've ever heard. And somehow that was worse. Because you can recover from being outplayed. You can practice more, get better, come back for revenge. But you can't recover from realizing you've been speaking a language you don't actually understand. You can't come back from that. You can only start over. What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. The chair Jimi sat in that afternoon stayed in that rehearsal room for another decade. Musicians who rented the space would sometimes sit in it. Wonder if some residual magic remained. Play a few notes. Listen to how they sounded in that small room with its bare walls and wooden floor. The chair was eventually thrown away when the building was renovated in 1978. But before it was, someone carved something into the wooden seat. Just 4 words. What are you saying? Not who are you. Not how good are you. What are you saying? That's the question Jimi Hendrix asked without words. Not through challenge. Not through confrontation. Just through sitting in a chair and playing his guitar like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't need crowd tricks. He didn't need fire or spectacle or anything external. Because what he had was internal. Complete. Unshakable. The rival band came to test the legend. They left understanding that legends aren't built on skill. They're built on presence. On the ability to be so completely yourself that everyone else in the room has to reconsider who they are. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Jimi Hendrix played that quiet afternoon session and walked away without ceremony. No grand exit. No final words. Just a nod and a closed door. The 5 musicians sat in silence long after he left. One by one, they picked up their instruments. Tried to play. Put them down again. David never challenged anyone again. He spent the next year learning to listen instead of prove. His playing changed. Slower. Quieter. True. Colin, the bass player, said it best years later. We came to expose a fraud. We left realizing we'd been frauds ourselves. Not because we couldn't play, we could. But because we'd forgotten why. The rehearsal room is gone now. The building demolished. But musicians still tell the story. Not about the guy who set his guitar on fire. About the guy who sat in a chair and played 4 minutes that changed everything. Jimi Hendrix didn't destroy egos with volume. He destroyed them with truth. And truth, delivered quietly, is the loudest sound in any room.